What do you do when the person you love keeps holding your hand, but never your heart? She told herself love was supposed to feel safe, but with him, it felt like walking barefoot through broken glass. Every smile came with a silence that cut deeper than words. Every kiss felt borrowed, like he was there, but somewhere else entirely. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not that he didn't love her, but that he pretended he could. The day she met him wasn't supposed to be anything special. The sky was dull gray, the kind that makes the world look like it's exhaling. She was running late to work, coffee in one hand, bag slung over her shoulder, when she nearly collided with him outside a small corner bookstore. Her cup tilted, hot liquid spilling across her wrist, and she hissed under her breath. He reacted instantly, fumbling for napkins, apologizing in that half-panicked, half-charming way that made her laugh even as she was wiping her sleeve. His voice carried warmth, a little rough around the edges. "I'm so sorry. I swear I wasn't texting." "Well, okay, maybe I was, but I promise I'm not one of those people." She smiled despite herself. "You're literally describing one of those people." He grinned, wide and boyish, and something in her chest shifted. Just like that, an ordinary morning wasn't ordinary anymore. His name was Eli. Hers, Riley. He offered to replace her coffee, and she tried to refuse, but he insisted, so they ended up walking to a nearby cafe. Two strangers caught in the kind of moment that feels like fate pretending to be coincidence. They talked about small things, books, podcasts, bad coffee. He was a photojournalist who just moved back into the city after spending years chasing stories overseas. She was a freelance designer trying to build something steady after a few too many disappointments. It was easy the way they talked. No pressure, no pretense. She didn't even realize how much time had passed until she checked her phone and saw 10 missed messages from her client. They said goodbye with that awkward politeness that always comes after unexpected chemistry, both pretending they wouldn't think about it, both knowing they would. She told herself it was just one of those brief encounters that make life feel lighter for a second. But 2 days later, she saw him again. Same bookstore, different hour. He claimed it was fate. She accused him of stalking her. They laughed. He asked for her number. She gave it. In the weeks that followed, they became something that didn't need a label. Coffee dates turned into late-night calls, inside jokes, and that kind of slow intimacy that creeps in through laughter before you realize it's made a home in your chest. Eli was easy to be around. He had this quiet steadiness, this way of looking at her that made her feel like he was seeing the best parts of her, even the ones she didn't show often. Riley wasn't used to that. She'd always been the one giving, fixing, carrying the emotional weight in every relationship. But with him, she wanted to believe it could be different. The first time he kissed her, it wasn't dramatic. They were sitting in his car, talking about nothing. Music, childhood stories, her weird fear of thunderstorms. When he reached out, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and kissed her. It wasn't long or urgent, but it was sure. She remembered the quiet that followed, how her heart raced and his eyes lingered. He smiled softly, thumb grazing her jaw. "You talk too much when you're nervous," he teased. She whispered back, "Then I guess I'll never shut up around you." But love, she would later realize, isn't measured in moments like that. It's measured in what comes after. And what came after were cracks, small, invisible at first. Missed calls, vague excuses, the way he'd withdraw sometimes, like he was drifting into a place she couldn't reach. She didn't say anything at first. She'd learned not to push. People stay when they want to. She told herself he was busy, that love didn't always need constant validation. But in the quiet, her insecurities whispered otherwise. One evening, she stopped by his apartment unannounced with takeout. She'd been missing him, wanted to feel close again. When he opened the door, he looked surprised, not unhappy, but startled, like she'd stepped into a space that wasn't entirely hers. His smile was slower that night, his touch distant. Over dinner, he barely talked, scrolling through his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. When she finally asked if something was wrong, he said, "Nothing. I'm just tired." But his eyes told a different story. That night, when she got home, she sat in the dark and wondered if she was imagining things. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she wanted too much. She hated how easily love made her doubt herself. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that she was already losing something that hadn't even had the chance to become whole. A week later, he canceled their plans again. This time, no excuse. Just a short text. Can we reschedule? She stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to ask why, to demand more. The other part, the one that had been here before, knew how this story usually ended. Still, she typed back, sure. Let me know when. And he never did. Days turned into weeks. Silence stretched between them like a tight wire. She tried to focus on work, to pretend she wasn't checking her phone every few minutes. But one night, scrolling through her messages, she found their first conversation. The way he'd said, "You make ordinary things feel better." She almost laughed at how easily words can lie. Then, out of nowhere, he called. His voice was the same, calm, familiar, magnetic. He said he'd been dealing with things, that he'd missed her, that he didn't mean to disappear. She wanted to be angry, but she wasn't. She was just tired. Still, she agreed to see him. Because love, real or imagined, makes fools out of the strongest people. When they met, he looked different, not visibly, but in the energy he carried. Distant, apologetic, but not remorseful. They walked along the river, talking about nothing important, until she stopped and said quietly, "Eli, do you even want this anymore?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the water, hands in his pockets. Finally, he said, "I don't know." And just like that, everything inside her went quiet. No tears, no outburst, just a heavy kind of understanding. She nodded, stepped back, and whispered the words that would echo in his head long after she was gone. "Let me go if you can't love me back." The air around them seemed to still, and for the first time, he didn't try to stop her. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally understood that love without effort is cruelty disguised as comfort. She walked away, not because she didn't love him, but because she finally loved herself enough to stop begging for half of someone who would never give her whole. And though her heart ached, there was something freeing about the silence that followed, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. The days after she walked away felt quieter than she expected. Not peaceful, just empty, the kind of silence that hums behind your ribs and makes every small sound feel louder than it should. Riley thought time would help her forget, but it didn't. It only made the memories sharpen. The sound of his voice when he said, "I don't know," replayed like a scratch in her favorite song. She hated how easily those 3 words managed to undo everything she'd built in her head. Mornings became routine again, just work and long stretches of nothing. She stopped going by the bookstore, avoided the coffee shop where they first met. Every place carried echoes of him, and she didn't trust herself not to look for him in the crowd. She told herself she was healing, but really, she was just hiding, patching over the ache with busyness and distraction. Still, she kept checking her phone at night, half expecting his name to light up her screen again. It didn't. Eli, meanwhile, was struggling with the silence in his own way. He told himself that space was what he needed, to think, to breathe, to get his life in order, but space without her felt heavier than he thought it would. He still went through the motions, taking photos, editing assignments, sending them off to magazines that barely paid enough to care. But his work lost its spark. His friends noticed a shift, though no one said much. One night, his best friend Mark finally asked, "You good, man? You've been zoning out lately." Eli shrugged, pretending to laugh it off. "Just tired." It was easier to lie than to admit he'd messed up something good. He thought about calling her more times than he could count, but every time he picked up his phone, guilt stopped him. What could he say? "I didn't know what I had until I lost it" sounded too cliché, too late. And maybe he didn't deserve her forgiveness. Riley had always been sure about him, and he'd given her uncertainty in return. That realization hurt more than he expected. Weeks turned into months. Fall crept in quietly, painting the city in shades of orange and brown. Riley found herself walking home one evening under the fading light, the air crisp and full of that bittersweet smell of change. She stopped by a small art supply store she hadn't visited in a while. It was where she used to buy materials for her design projects, the kind of place that always reminded her who she was before she started defining herself through someone else. The owner, an older woman named June, greeted her with a warm smile. "Haven't seen you in forever, honey. How's the world treating you?" Riley forced a smile, trying to figure that out. June nodded knowingly, the way older people do when they've seen love bruise enough hearts to recognize it without explanation. That night, Riley sat by her window sketching again for the first time in months. Her lines were shaky, unsure, but she didn't stop. It wasn't about perfection. It was about remembering how to be alone without feeling lonely. She poured her emotions into the page, translating ache into color, heartbreak into shape. For the first time since Eli, she felt something close to peace. But healing isn't linear, and love doesn't vanish on command. Some nights still hurt more than others. There were moments when she'd wake up from a dream where he was still there, smiling that soft, crooked smile. And for a split second, she'd believe everything was fine. Then reality would settle in like cold air seeping under a door, reminding her that he was gone, and that she was the one who told him to let her go. Meanwhile, Eli's guilt began morphing into longing. He'd see couples laughing on the street or pass by a coffee shop window, and catch himself searching for her reflection. He didn't realize how much space she'd occupied in his life until it all went quiet. He tried to distract himself with work again, taking assignments that sent him out of the city, anything to escape the weight of familiarity. But no matter how many miles he traveled, she followed him in the quiet moments. The song she liked, the smell of cinnamon when he ordered his coffee, the memory of her head resting on his shoulder during long drives. One evening, after a late shoot by the pier, Eli sat watching the sun drop below the horizon. His camera was beside him, untouched. For the first time in a long while, he thought about what it really meant to love someone. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures or the perfect moment. Maybe it was about staying even when you're scared, about showing up even when you don't know what to say. And that's what he hadn't done. He'd let fear turn him into a ghost while she was still reaching for his hand. Back in the city, Riley's life was quietly rebuilding. She picked up more clients, started saving again, even went out with friends who refused to let her sink into isolation. One night, at a small rooftop hangout, a guy named Nathan struck up a conversation. He was gentle, easygoing, a little shy. He didn't push. He just talked to her, made her laugh. For the first time in months, she felt something flicker, a reminder that her heart was still capable of warmth. But even as she smiled, a small part of her hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone else in, or if she was just trying to prove to herself that she could. Later that night, walking home, she realized she didn't owe anyone readiness. Healing wasn't about forgetting Eli or finding someone new. It was about forgiving herself for loving too deeply, for hoping too much. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and whispered to herself, one day at a time. Across the city, Eli was staring at his phone again. He'd written a message to her, a simple "Hey, I hope you're okay," and deleted it 3 times. He didn't know if reaching out would heal anything or just reopen what she'd already closed. But the thought of her never knowing how much she mattered to him felt worse. After a long pause, he typed again, "I've been thinking about you. I'm sorry for everything." His thumb hovered over send. His heart beat too fast. Then, just like before, he hesitated. He turned off his phone, leaned back, and closed his eyes. Maybe it wasn't time yet. Maybe she deserved her peace before he asked for another chance. And somewhere between his silence and her healing, the universe stayed still, 2 hearts learning, in their own broken ways, how to exist apart without erasing what once was. Riley hadn't expected peace to feel so quiet. It wasn't happiness exactly, more like a gentle surrender, the kind that comes when you stop fighting the ache and let it live where it wants to. She'd made a habit of morning walks, earbuds in, letting the world move around her without needing to catch up. Work was steady, her apartment felt like home again, and even the silence didn't sting as much anymore. Some mornings, she'd still think of Eli, but the thought didn't unravel her the way it used to. It was strange, realizing that missing someone didn't mean you wanted them back. She was sitting at a cafe one afternoon, working on a new design project when her phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number flashed on her screen. "Hey, Riley. It's Eli." Her breath caught before she could stop it. It had been 4 months since the last time she'd seen his face, for months since she'd told him to let her go. She stared at the message for a long minute before locking her phone and sliding it face down on the table. Her heart was loud in her chest, her thoughts louder. An hour later, she finally opened it again. The message was still there, simple and cautious. He hadn't said "I miss you" or "Can we talk?" Just her name and his, like a soft knock on a door, he wasn't sure he had the right to touch anymore. She typed a reply, erased it, and tried again. Finally, she sent, "Hey, how have you been?" His response came almost immediately. "Better now." They talked for a while. Nothing heavy, just small updates. He told her about the photo exhibit he'd been preparing for, how he was trying to rebuild his focus. She told him about her work, about trying new things, about learning to slow down. Their conversation was careful, like walking barefoot on glass, but there was warmth there too. When she left the cafe, she caught herself smiling, then stopped, wondering if that smile meant she was slipping back into something she wasn't ready for. That night, she sat by her window, phone in hand, scrolling through their old texts. It was strange, reading the echoes of who they used to be. Two people who believed love could fix anything. But maybe it wasn't about fixing now. Maybe it was about understanding. She thought about blocking him, about sparing herself the confusion, but her heart whispered something softer. You can forgive someone without giving them back the same place in your life. Over the next few weeks, they texted occasionally. Sometimes days went by without a word. Sometimes they'd talk late into the night about everything and nothing. He didn't apologize again. He didn't need to. The way he spoke now carried a quiet remorse, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. He'd changed, or maybe he'd just grown up. But Riley didn't let her heart run ahead this time. She'd built her boundaries too carefully to lose herself again. Then came a night it all shifted. She was leaving her office when it started to rain, sudden and heavy. The streets were nearly empty, and she was trying to flag a cab when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Riley." She turned, and there he was, hood pulled up, rain dripping from his lashes, that same unsure half-smile that once made her weak. For a second, she couldn't move. The world seemed to pause, everything blurring except him. "You're really here," he said softly, as if he didn't quite believe it. She crossed her arms, half to shield herself from the rain, half from the rush of old feelings. "You texted me, Eli. I didn't exactly vanish." He smiled faintly, eyes searching hers. "I know, but seeing you, it's different." They ended up at a small diner nearby, the kind that smelled like coffee and rain. Neither of them spoke much at first. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, he said quietly, "You look happier." She hesitated. "I am." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "Good. You deserve that." She studied him for a moment. The tired eyes, the faint stubble, the way his fingers tapped nervously against his cup. He looked older somehow, softer but sadder. "Why did you really reach out, Eli?" she asked finally. He met her gaze, and for once, he didn't try to deflect. "Because I realized I was afraid to love you for real," he said. "And by the time I stopped being afraid, you were gone." Her throat tightened. "You think saying that fixes anything?" "No," he said. "It's not about fixing. It's about not pretending anymore." The rain outside softened to a drizzle. She leaned back, trying to steady her breathing. "I spent months trying to understand why I wasn't enough for you," she said quietly. "Then I realized it wasn't about me. You were fighting your own ghosts." He looked down, eyes glistening. "I was, and I'm still learning how to stop." For a long moment, they just sat there, the hum of the diner wrapping around them like a fragile truce. There was pain, yes, but also peace. Maybe love didn't need to be rekindled to be meaningful. Maybe just understanding each other now was enough. When they finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped, the pavement glistening under the streetlights. He walked her halfway home, hands tucked in his pockets. At her building, he paused, glancing at her like he wanted to say more. "I'm not asking for another chance," he said. "I just needed you to know I never stopped caring." She nodded slowly. I know. He smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but still means something. Take care of yourself, Riley. She watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner. For the first time since they met, she didn't feel torn. She felt whole, like she'd finally closed a chapter without bitterness. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape. And maybe letting go isn't about losing someone. It's about freeing both of you to become who you were meant to be." Outside, the rain started again, soft and rhythmic, as if the universe was exhaling with her. Riley didn't cry that night. She thought she might, after seeing him again, but instead, there was this strange calm settling deep in her chest. It was the kind of calm that comes when you finally stop trying to rewrite the past. She slept peacefully for the first time in months. No racing thoughts, no what-ifs. By morning, the world felt lighter, quieter, and beautifully ordinary. She made coffee, opened her laptop, and began sketching. For once, she wasn't creating to escape pain or to fill silence. She was creating because it felt good again. Days passed, and the memory of that rainy night didn't haunt her. It lingered softly, like a melody she no longer needed to hum. She saw Eli sometimes on social media, a photo of his exhibit, a picture of him laughing with friends. It no longer stung. She even found herself smiling, genuinely glad he was doing okay. Her life began to move forward in small, steady steps. Then came the email. A brand collaboration she'd applied for months ago finally got back to her. They wanted her designs for a fall campaign. It wasn't just a small project. It was the kind of opportunity that could shift her career completely. She read the email 3 times to make sure she wasn't imagining it. The company was based in Seattle, meaning she'd need to travel for a few weeks to work on the launch. She said yes immediately, heart racing with excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. The move wasn't permanent, but it felt symbolic, a new beginning, a clean chapter. She packed light, said goodbye to her small apartment, and promised herself she'd focus on nothing but her work and her growth. Seattle greeted her with cold air and rain, the kind that clung to your skin and carried stories in its rhythm. She rented a tiny studio near the project site, threw herself into the design process, and for the first time in years, felt proud of the woman she was becoming. Meanwhile, Eli had been keeping his promise to himself. No contact, no dragging her back into the past. But the truth was, she was still there in the spaces between his days. Her absence had forced him to look at himself in ways he'd avoided for years. He'd started therapy, something he never thought he'd need, learning how to sit with the silence instead of running from it. His photography evolved too, less about chasing headlines, more about emotion. People started noticing. One of his shots, a quiet portrait of an old couple holding hands, went viral for its simplicity. The caption read, "Sometimes love is just showing up and staying there." Weeks later, he was invited to speak at a creative conference in Seattle. He hesitated before accepting, but part of him knew he couldn't say no. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was something else. He didn't know she was there, working in the same city, breathing the same damp air. The universe had its own quiet way of folding people back into each other's paths. Riley's project was nearing completion when she got the event invitation from a colleague. "You should come," her co-worker said excitedly. "It's a creative conference, tons of designers, photographers, storytellers. It'll be good networking." She almost declined. She'd been too focused on work to think about mingling, but something nudged her to say yes. The conference was buzzing with people, the air electric with ideas and conversation. She wandered through the halls, coffee in hand, listening to panel discussions. When the announcer introduced the next speaker, a photojournalist named Eli Carter, her breath caught. For a second, she thought she'd misheard. But when he walked onto the stage, tall and familiar, with that same quiet steadiness in his eyes, her heart knew before her mind caught up. He looked different now, more grounded, more certain. His talk wasn't about fame or technique, it was about truth. "Sometimes we take pictures because we're afraid to feel," he said into the microphone. "We hide behind the lens, telling stories we can't say out loud. But the best photos the real ones, they come when you stop hiding. His voice wavered slightly, eyes scanning the crowd, and for one suspended moment, they found hers. The world seemed to narrow down to that single look, recognition, surprise, and something softer, older. After the session, she tried to leave quietly, but fate wasn't done playing its games. She heard his voice behind her. "Riley." She turned, heart thudding. He looked at her like someone seeing sunlight after months of gray. "I didn't know you were here," he said, a breathless laugh escaping him. "Guess we both found new cities to get lost in." She smiled faintly. "And somehow, we still found the same one." They walked together toward the exit, the conversation easy at first, work, travel, mutual friends. It wasn't awkward. It felt strangely natural, like no time had passed. But beneath the casual tone was a quiet current neither of them wanted to name. Outside, the rain had started again, light and steady. He stopped under the awning, hands deep in his jacket pockets. "You look happy," he said softly. "I am," she replied. "Really this time." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I can see that." There was a pause, heavy but gentle. "I didn't come here to complicate anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know I've been trying to be better. The kind of person who doesn't run anymore." She looked at him, searching his face for traces of the man she'd once loved. There he was, and yet he wasn't. Something had shifted between them. Less pain, more understanding. "I'm glad," she said quietly. "You deserve that peace too." They stood there for a long moment, watching the rain fall. He smiled, small and real. "Maybe this is how it was supposed to end," he said. She tilted her head. "End?" He shrugged softly. "Not like goodbye. More like closure." She nodded, her chest warm but steady. "Then let's call it that." They exchanged one last look. No promises, no lingering tension. Just two people who had finally learned how to love without holding on too tightly. When she walked away this time, it didn't hurt. It felt right. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, the sound of rain trailing behind her like a song that had finally found its last note. The weeks after Seattle felt like waking up from a long, gentle dream. Riley returned home different, lighter, steadier, more grounded than she'd been in years. There was no heartbreak lingering this time, no ache that demanded attention. What she carried back with her wasn't pain, it was peace. She had finally learned to hold her past without letting it hold her. Work was thriving, and she poured herself into it fully. Her designs had gained attention from clients she'd only ever dreamed of working with. Each day had a quiet rhythm now. Coffee by the window, music humming softly, sketchbook open, peace blooming where chaos once lived. Her friends noticed the difference too. "You've been smiling more lately," her friend Mia teased one evening over dinner. Riley grinned. "Guess I'm finally catching up with my happiness." They laughed, and it felt good, real, not forced. It was strange how healing sometimes sneaks up on you, how one day you just stop counting the days since someone left. She hadn't spoken to Eli since that rainy night outside the conference center. There had been no follow-up texts, no attempts to turn closure into something else. And she was grateful for that. What they shared had already said everything that needed to be said. Sometimes silence was the most respectful kind of ending. Still, life had a quiet way of reminding her of him. In the songs he once showed her, in the way light touched the morning air. Not painfully, just softly, like remembering a friend who once knew your soul better than anyone. She didn't run from those memories anymore. She let them exist because they were part of who she was. Months passed, and with the changing seasons came new beginnings. Riley was offered a permanent design position at the company she'd freelanced for, and this time, she said yes. She moved into a slightly bigger apartment closer to the studio, adopted a small cat she named Theo, and began rebuilding her life in quiet, beautiful ways. But love has a way of finding people when they stop chasing it. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. She was in line at a local farmer's market, her phone pressed between her shoulder and cheek as she argued with a supplier about fabric delays. The man behind her chuckled lightly, his voice deep but warm. "You sound like you're winning that argument." She turned, half annoyed, half amused, and froze. He wasn't Eli, but there was something familiar about his presence, something disarming in the way he smiled. "I hope I am," she replied with a laugh. "Otherwise, I'm about to lose 3 days of work." He grinned, adjusting the box he was holding. "I'm a chef. Trust me, suppliers have a special talent for making us miserable." They talked as they waited in line, trading small frustrations and small smiles. His name was Aaron, and by the time she got her bag of produce, he'd made her laugh enough that she didn't even realize she'd given him her number. Their connection wasn't instant fireworks. It was warmth, quiet, and steady, the kind that sneaks up on you without warning. He texted her that evening, asking if she'd like to try the pasta recipe he was testing for his restaurant. She said yes, and when she showed up that weekend, the night unfolded like something soft and genuine. No pretense, no pretending to be fine. Just two people sharing stories, laughter, and a meal that felt like comfort. What struck her most about Aaron was his presence. When he spoke, he listened too. When he looked at her, he really saw her. She didn't feel like she was trying to prove her worth or hide her scars. He didn't ask about her past, and she didn't rush to explain it. They existed in the now, and that was enough. But somewhere deep inside, she was careful. She moved slowly, not out of fear, but respect for herself, for what she'd learned. The first time Aaron reached across the table and brushed his fingers against hers, she froze for a second before letting her hand rest beneath his. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Yeah, just remembering how this feels." Over the next few months, their connection grew naturally, without the heaviness of forced promises. He became a part of her routines, dropping by her studio with coffee, inviting her to taste test new dishes, encouraging her to chase ideas that scared her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Riley wasn't just surviving love, she was living it. One evening, as they walked by the river, Aaron slipped his hand into hers and said, "You make everything feel calm." She looked up at him, heart full and soft. "That's new for me," she said honestly. "I used to think love had to hurt to be real." He squeezed her hand gently. "Nah, the right kind of love doesn't make you question yourself. It just makes you sure." Later that night, when she got home, Riley stood by her window and let herself breathe in the stillness. She thought of Eli, not with longing, but with gratitude. Because without him, she wouldn't have known how to love this way. Pain had taught her boundaries. Heartbreak had taught her self-worth. And peace had taught her what real love was supposed to feel like. Across the city, Eli saw her name again, this time in a magazine spread about the new design campaign she'd led. Her photo was small, but her smile was unmistakable. He sat there for a while, looking at it, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. He didn't reach out. He didn't need to. He just smiled softly, whispered to himself, "She made it," and closed the magazine. Somewhere in the same city, under the same fading sky, Riley whispered to her reflection, "I did." By spring, Riley's life had settled into something that felt almost like rhythm. Steady mornings, laughter that came easily, nights that didn't ache with old memories. Aaron fit into her world in a way that didn't demand rearranging everything she'd built. He wasn't trying to fix her or change her. He simply stood beside her, steady and sure. They cooked together on Sundays, shared playlists while she worked on designs, and spent lazy evenings on the couch talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't a fairy tale, and that's what made it beautiful. It was real, yet peace has its own quiet way of testing you. One Thursday afternoon, while packing up her sketches for a client meeting, Riley's phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. She almost ignored it, but something, a flicker of instinct, made her swipe to answer. "Riley." The voice was hesitant, familiar in a way that sent her heart stumbling. "Eli." For a second, she couldn't speak. She hadn't heard that voice in almost a year, and yet it was the same, low, calm, steady. She inhaled softly. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd pick up," he said, voice awkward, careful. "I almost didn't." He chuckled faintly. "Fair. I saw your work in the Modern Design Review. It was incredible. You're doing amazing things, Riley." She smiled faintly, her tone gentle. "Thank you, Eli." There was a pause, one of those silences thick with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Not for calling. For back then. For all of it. Riley closed her eyes, letting his words land softly. Once upon a time, she would have waited her whole life to hear them. Now, they didn't hurt or heal, they just were. I know, she said quietly, and I forgave you a long time ago. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and sadness. I'm glad you did. I don't think I ever forgave myself. The conversation was brief, just a few minutes, but when she hung up, her hands trembled slightly, not from love, but from the weight of closure. It was strange how the past could find its way back when you least expected it. That night, as she told Aaron about the call, he listened silently. His brow didn't furrow, his tone didn't sharpen. He just listened. Are you okay? He asked finally. Riley nodded. Yeah, it just felt final, you know. Aaron reached over, took her hand, and said softly, then maybe it was. But the truth was something inside her shifted. Not because she still wanted Eli, but because hearing him again reminded her of the version of herself that once settled for half-love. She didn't miss him. She missed how deeply she used to feel. And that realization scared her. Over the next few weeks, Riley found herself overthinking little things. When Aaron didn't text back for hours, when his tone felt distracted, when their silences stretched a little longer than usual. He'd been busier than usual with the restaurant opening, and she knew that, but anxiety has a way of twisting reason into ache. One night, after another late cancellation from him, she found herself pacing her apartment, trying not to spiral. Theo, her cat, watched her quietly from the couch. You'd think I'd have learned by now, she murmured. But here I am again, waiting. When Aaron finally came by the next evening, she didn't hide the storm in her chest. Can I ask you something? She said, trying to keep her voice steady. Of course, he said, sitting across from her. Do you ever feel like you're pulling away? He frowned slightly, not defensive, just confused. Pulling away? No, Riley. I've just been overwhelmed with work. You know that. I do. She hesitated. Sometimes I feel like I'm too much. Or maybe I expect too much. Aaron's expression softened immediately. He stood, walked over, and sat beside her. Hey, he said gently, you're not too much. You just care deeply. That's not something to apologize for. Her throat tightened. I used to think that kind of caring scared people off. He smiled faintly. Then they weren't your people. His words settled deep, grounding her. Still, she couldn't shake the subtle reminder of how easily love could slip into imbalance. She promised herself she wouldn't chase someone's attention again, not even Aaron's. Days turned into weeks, and as summer came, life found its balance again. Aaron's restaurant launched successfully, and Riley attended the opening night, watching him move with quiet pride. When he spotted her in the crowd, his whole face lit up. You came, he said, pulling her close. Of course I did, she whispered. You deserve this. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Aaron found her standing outside under the soft glow of streetlights. You know, he said, hands in his pockets, I used to think love had to be dramatic, loud, chaotic. But then I met you, and it felt like exhaling for the first time. Riley smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes. That's exactly how I feel. And for the first time, she realized love didn't have to hurt to be remembered. It didn't need grand gestures or endless apologies. Sometimes it just needed two people choosing calm over chaos, presence over promises. That night, as they walked home hand in hand, Riley thought about everything it took to get here. The heartbreak, the silence, the learning. Every piece of her past had led her to this piece. And somewhere, in the quiet between their footsteps, she finally understood that loving again wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about becoming whole enough to be found. By late summer, the world around Riley seemed softer, slower, like everything was finally breathing at the same pace as her heart. The sun lingered longer on her window sills. The air tasted faintly of peace, and love didn't feel like something she had to fight to keep. It simply existed, steady, warm, alive. Aaron and she had fallen into an easy rhythm that felt earned. They cooked together most nights, took late walks by the pier, argued gently about what movie to watch, and fell asleep to the same quiet music she used to listen to alone. He brought balance into her world without trying to fix anything, and she loved that about him. But peace is fragile when the past still has echoes. One afternoon, as she sorted through her emails, she received a message from an unknown sender. The subject line read, New York Design Expo Invitation. It was from the same agency that had once rejected her early designs, back when Eli had still been her biggest supporter and her greatest confusion. The event was a week-long design showcase, one that gathered some of the most influential artists in the country. It was the kind of opportunity she'd once dreamed of, and as fate would have it, Eli's firm was listed among the sponsors. When she told Aaron about the invitation, he smiled. That's amazing, Riley. You have to go. She hesitated. You're sure you're okay with that? He looked puzzled. Why wouldn't I be? She smiled faintly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. No reason. Just old ghosts, maybe. He stepped closer, brushing a thumb over her cheek. Then it's time to stop letting ghosts make decisions for you. And so she went. New York in September hummed with energy, taxi horns, chatter, flashes of color, and the weight of dreams carried in every street. Riley checked into her hotel, notebook in hand, sketches neatly packed, and heart steady. She wasn't here to prove herself to anyone. She was here because she had earned it. The first 2 days passed in a blur of panels, client meetings, and handshakes. Her collection was well received. Critics called her style intimate, grounded, emotionally intelligent. She smiled at the reviews, grateful but not consumed. She'd stopped needing validation the way she once did. On the third evening, during a networking dinner, she saw him. Eli, standing near the balcony, glass in hand, talking to a small group of designers. He looked the same, but older somehow, less sharp, more human. Their eyes met across the room for a second, and it felt like déjà vu, like time folding quietly into itself. He smiled, a small, tentative one, and she returned it. That was all. No rush, no ache, just recognition. Later that night, as she gathered her things to leave, he approached her by the door. Hey, he said softly. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to see you either. He chuckled awkwardly. You look happy. I am, she said simply. They talked briefly about work, the industry life. He mentioned that he'd taken a step back from the corporate chaos, focusing more on mentorship and smaller projects. There was humility in his voice now, and she noticed the change. Before they parted, he said, I'm really proud of you, Riley. You did everything you said you would. She smiled, not out of nostalgia, but closure. Thank you, Eli. That means more than you know. That night, as she walked back to her hotel, she didn't cry. She didn't spiral. She just felt free. When she returned home, Aaron picked her up from the airport, his arms wrapping around her in that familiar way that made the world go quiet. How was it? He asked. It was good, she said honestly. Better than I thought it would be. They drove in comfortable silence, her hand resting in his, city lights dancing across the windshield. She felt grounded again, like no part of her was still wandering. But over the next few days, a subtle distance crept in. Aaron seemed quieter, preoccupied. When she asked if everything was okay, he brushed it off with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. One evening, she found him sitting by her window, lost in thought. What's going on? She asked gently. He sighed. You've been different since you got back. Not bad different, just distant. Riley frowned. I don't mean to be. I guess the trip made me reflect a lot. About him. The question caught her off guard. About me, she said. About how far I've come. Aaron nodded slowly, his gaze softening. I believe you. It's just, sometimes it's hard not to wonder if there's still a piece of you he owns. Riley stepped closer, kneeling in front of him. He doesn't own any part of me. Not anymore. But I can't erase what made me who I am. I don't want to. He studied her face, then smiled faintly. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm not jealous, Riley. Just human. She placed a hand on his knee. Good. Because I'm not looking for perfect. Just honest. That night, they made love slowly, without words, without the desperation of trying to prove anything. It was connection, not validation. But still, life had its way of testing peace. A week later, Aaron received an offer to open a second restaurant, this time in California. It was everything he'd worked for, but it also meant distance, uncertainty, and decisions neither of them were ready to make. He told her one evening over dinner, his tone careful. "It's a big opportunity, Riley. I want to take it." Her heart clenched, but she smiled. "You should." He hesitated. "And us?" Riley looked at him, eyes soft. "We'll figure it out." But later that night, lying awake beside him, she felt the old ache return, the fear of loving someone she might lose. She turned toward him, tracing invisible lines on his arm. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. If it ever feels like you can't love me the way I need, don't hold on out of obligation. Just let me go." He looked at her then, eyes dark and full of something tender. "I won't let you go easily," he said. She smiled faintly. "I know, but if you ever have to, let me go if you can't love me back." He kissed her forehead, pulling her close, whispering, "I won't forget." Outside, the city was quiet, but inside her heart, something shifted again, a calm acceptance that love, no matter how steady, always required the courage to let go when the time came. Autumn came with a bittersweet chill that settled into everything, into the leaves that drifted down the streets, into the air between Riley and Aaron, into the slow way time began to move when uncertainty crept in. He had accepted the California offer, and though it wasn't immediate, the countdown had begun. 3 months until he'd leave for San Francisco to oversee the launch of the new restaurant. 3 months until their quiet routines would shift into something undefined. At first, they both handled it with optimism. Riley told herself love could survive distance. She'd seen relationships thrive between cities, between time zones. But as the days passed, a quiet fear began to hum beneath every conversation. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle, like a crack you don't notice until it becomes a fracture. Aaron started spending longer hours at the restaurant, tied up in meetings and preparations for his transition. Riley tried to be understanding. She was understanding, but there were nights she'd sit alone at her desk, staring at her phone, wondering when his running late text had started to sound more like, "I'm slipping away." One Friday night, after a particularly long day, she decided to visit him at the restaurant. She brought a bag of his favorite pastries and a tired smile. When she walked in, he was laughing with one of his sous chefs, a young woman with kind eyes and flour streaked across her apron. There was nothing romantic about it, but something about their easy connection made Riley pause. Aaron noticed her, his face lighting up. "Hey, I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to surprise you," she said softly, handing him the bag. He wiped his hands and leaned in to kiss her cheek. "You're amazing. I missed you." But later that night, when she got home, she couldn't shake the unease that had lodged itself deep inside her. She wasn't jealous of the woman. She was afraid of losing space in his world. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other less. The calls became shorter, the conversations practical. He'd talk about floor plans and menus. She'd talk about deadlines and designs. They were still together, but the together part felt increasingly like a technicality. One evening, as she sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a text from Aaron. "Running late again. Don't wait up. Love you." She typed back, "Okay. Be safe." But she didn't hit send. She stared at the words for a long time, realizing how routine it had become, this quiet acceptance of absence. Eventually, she locked her phone and whispered to the night, "This is how people fade." The next weekend, Aaron showed up unexpectedly at her door, exhausted but smiling. "Hey," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I missed you." She smiled faintly. "Then stop missing me and start showing up." He froze, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt," she said quietly. "You're here, but half of you is already gone." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. "Riley, I'm trying. You know how much this means to me." "I do," she said, voice trembling. "But what do I mean to you in the middle of it?" He stepped closer, eyes searching hers. "You mean everything. But this is my dream too. And what if loving me doesn't fit into it anymore?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm just asking you to be honest about whether we still exist the same way we did before." He looked at her, his silence saying everything words couldn't. That night, he stayed, but it wasn't the same. There was a space between them that even touch couldn't fill. And for the first time, Riley realized that sometimes love doesn't die. It just outgrows the people who built it. Weeks went by, and the day of Aaron's departure drew closer. He tried to make it easier with promises. "I'll visit every month. We'll call every night. It won't change anything." She smiled at each one, even though she knew love wasn't about the promises people made when they were scared. It was about the ones they kept when no one was watching. The night before his flight, they sat on the floor of her apartment, sharing takeout, avoiding the inevitable goodbye that hung between them. "Hey," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "You know this isn't the end, right?" Riley looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face, the tired kindness in his eyes, the way his thumb traced the back of her hand like he was afraid she'd disappear. "I know," she said quietly, "but it's the start of something we can't name yet." He leaned in and kissed her gently, slow, familiar, lingering. And in that kiss, she felt both love and loss. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back for you." She smiled faintly. "Then come back because you want to, not because you promised to." When he left the next morning, she stood by the window, watching the taxi disappear down the street. She didn't cry. She didn't chase. She just stood there, breathing in the silence he left behind. For the next few weeks, she filled her days with work and light and quiet routines. She answered his calls when she could, smiled when he sent photos from California, and kept living. But deep down, she felt something loosening, the slow unraveling of a love that had started as calm and was ending as distance. Then one night, she got a call. Aaron's voice was soft but heavy. "Riley," he said, "I don't know how to say this without sounding cruel, but I think we both feel it, don't we?" She closed her eyes, the truth already waiting there. "Yeah," she whispered. "We do. I don't want to hurt you," he said. "You're not," she replied. "You're just telling the truth." There was a long pause. Then she said the words she'd once only practiced in her head. "If you can't love me the way I need, then let me go." He exhaled shakily. "I never stopped loving you, Riley." "I know," she said, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "But sometimes love isn't enough." When the call ended, she sat in silence for a long time. The ache was deep but clean. No bitterness, no regret. Just release. And for the first time in years, she understood that letting go didn't mean losing love. It meant setting it free. Winter arrived gently, the kind that made the city hum quieter and the night stretch longer. Snow dusted the rooftops, and everything seemed wrapped in stillness. Riley's world had found its balance again, though not the kind that came from certainty. This was the balance born from acceptance. It had been almost a year since Aaron left for California, and while their connection had ended softly, like a song fading instead of breaking, it still lingered in small ways. A familiar scent at the grocery store, a song he used to hum while cooking, but the pain had dulled into memory, and she was learning to exist without needing to fill every silence. Work had become her sanctuary again. Her design line had evolved, more raw, more honest, reflecting the woman she had become. People said her new collection felt human, maybe because it came from the parts of her that had learned both how to love and how to let go. She spent most evenings in her studio, soft jazz playing, sketching under warm light while Theo curled at her feet. Peace had stopped feeling temporary. On a quiet Friday evening, as snow fell against her window, her phone buzzed. It was an email, designer's winter gala invitation, San Francisco. Her name was listed among the featured designers. She smiled to herself, both nervous and proud. San Francisco, the city where Aaron lived now. She thought about not going, but deep down, she knew this wasn't about him. This was about who she had become, about standing in the same city that once symbolized goodbye and realizing it no longer had power over her. So she went. The trip was short, a weekend event. The first night, she stood among strangers and familiar faces, her collection displayed in soft lighting that made the fabrics glow. She wasn't nervous this time. She felt present. She talked to designers, investors, critics, confident, calm, complete. Then, as the night was winding down, she turned and froze. Aaron stood across the room. Not dramatically, not with any cinematic build-up. He was just there, holding a glass of wine, laughing with someone from the industry. For a brief second, time hesitated. Then he looked up and saw her. Their eyes met. There was no rush of pain, no sharp breath of nostalgia. Just recognition, soft, real, human. He excused himself from the conversation and walked toward her slowly, like someone afraid to disturb a fragile peace. "Hi," he said softly, voice still warm, still familiar. "Hey," she replied with a small smile. "Long time." "Yeah, too long." He paused, studying her face. "You look happy." "I am," she said, and she meant it. They stepped aside, away from the noise, into the quiet edge of the event hall. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like something finally settled. "I heard about your latest project," he said finally. "The emotional design series. It's beautiful, Riley. I'm really proud of you." "Thank you," she said softly. "Your new restaurant looks incredible. You've built something real, Aaron." He smiled, humble and sincere. "It's good. Busy. But it's not the same without." He stopped himself, shaking his head slightly. "Never mind." She met his eyes. "Without what?" He hesitated, then said, "Without someone to share it with." For a moment, something old flickered between them. Not longing, but understanding. Two people who had loved each other deeply, who had broken not from betrayal, but from time, distance, and the quiet evolution of self. "I used to think we were supposed to last forever," he said. "Now I think we were supposed to teach each other how to love right." Riley smiled faintly, her eyes glistening under the soft light. "Maybe that's what forever really means." They both laughed quietly, the sound easy and familiar. He looked at her one last time, the kind of look that carries both gratitude and goodbye. "You deserve everything, Riley. Don't ever settle for less." "I won't," she said. "And you deserve peace, Aaron. I hope you find it." They hugged, brief, warm, final. And when they stepped back, she didn't look over her shoulder as she walked away. Neither did he. Some stories don't need a second act. They just need an ending written in peace. The next morning, Riley walked along the San Francisco pier, the cold wind brushing against her face. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling gold across the water. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes as the light touched her skin. For years, she had chased love, begged for it, fought to keep it. Now, she simply was. She smiled to herself, whispering softly to the horizon, "Let me go if you can't love me back." The words didn't sound like heartbreak anymore. They sounded like freedom. And as the sun rose higher, Riley walked forward, her heart light, her future wide open, ready for whatever love would come next. Not because she needed it, but because she finally knew how to meet it whole. The spring after San Francisco felt like waking up in a different version of her life, quieter but fuller. Riley had moved into a smaller studio apartment, one with tall windows and plants that actually thrived because she finally remembered to water them. Her days began with coffee and music instead of anxiety. Her nights ended with gratitude instead of questions. She had started teaching a weekly workshop on emotional design at the community center downtown, something she'd once thought she wasn't ready or qualified enough to do. The first time she stood in front of her students, her voice shook. But as she spoke about creating from truth, about how heartbreak and hope were just two shades of the same color, the trembling faded. People listened, really listened. And she realized maybe this, too, was a kind of love, to give what you've learned, to make it mean something. One rainy afternoon after class, she found herself at a local cafe, sketchbook open, drawing patterns inspired by raindrops on glass. She didn't notice the man standing near the counter until he spoke. "Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is full." She looked up, startled, then smiled. He wasn't Aaron, not even close. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times, eyes steady but kind. "Sure," she said, sliding her things a little to the side. He sat, ordering tea instead of coffee, and smiled faintly. You draw beautifully. You look like someone who sees stories in everything. Riley laughed softly. That's probably accurate. I design for a living, and maybe overthink for free. They talked, not about the past, not about what either of them had lost, but about books, travel, food, little things. His name was Luke, a photographer who had recently moved to the city for a gallery project. Conversation with him didn't feel like catching fire. It felt like being warm again after a long, cold season. Over the following weeks, they met again, sometimes by chance, sometimes by plan. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners into long walks where laughter replaced silence. He wasn't trying to fill a space Aaron had left. He was just someone who showed up without asking her to shrink. One evening, they stood by the bridge near her apartment, city lights flickering below them, wind soft against their faces. "You always look like you're thinking too much," Luke said gently. She smiled. "Maybe I am. I used to think love was supposed to hurt, that it had to be intense or difficult to be real. And now I think it's supposed to make you breathe easier." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing softly against hers, and for the first time in a long while, Riley didn't pull away. The touch didn't scare her. It felt steady, patient, unforced. The world didn't stop spinning. Her heart didn't race wildly. Instead, it felt calm, whole, ready. Months passed, and life began to weave new rhythms. Shared mornings, separate dreams, gentle trust. She still missed her old version sometimes. The girl who once begged to be loved, the woman who once walked away, but she loved the one she had become most. Her new collection launched that summer, titled Return to Self. Every piece carried a story, threads of heartbreak, recovery, and rebirth stitched into fabric. At the show's closing, applause filled the room. Luke watched from the crowd, his camera lowered, eyes shining with pride. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the crowd faded, Riley stood alone backstage, looking at her work. She whispered to herself again, words that once broke her, but now healed her. "Let me go if you can't love me back." They no longer sounded like a plea. They sounded like a promise, one she'd made to herself, one she'd finally kept. Outside, Luke waited by the door, holding her coat. When she stepped out, the city lights reflected off her smile. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, more than ever, and as they walked hand in hand into the night, not as a woman running from pain, but as one walking freely toward the life she'd built, Riley finally understood that real love never asks you to beg, shrink, or break. It meets you where you stand and grows with you from there. Love didn't save her. She saved herself, and that was the most beautiful thing of all.